Today's daf we're going to be learning is Bava Batra daf Kuf Samachet. Today's daf is sponsored by Miriam Benson in loving memory of her mother, Evelyn Benson, Yocheved Bat Avraham Lev, V'chaya Batya. She died on October 20th, 2024 at the age of 100. She was a wonderful mother and role model. We miss her terribly, and I'm deeply grateful for her life. How lucky I am to have a mom such as this mom. We are going to get started today. Reminder about registering for Siyums wherever you are, either in your area or the Siyum on Zoom. The main Siyum will happen on Wednesday next week. We have a good lineup. You can see all the details on our homepage right at the top, and you can click there to register to get your own Zoom link. With that, we are going to get started. You might remember we ended with an interesting place with Rabbi Yomi bar Abba, who didn't recognize this woman, and then he thought it wasn't her document because he didn't remember writing out a shovar for her, and she claimed it wasn't hers. And the husband said, "What do you mean? It's my wife's. I already paid her the k'tuba." The woman was claiming the money, and then Rabbi Yomi bar Abba realizes from what the husband said that the woman got older, her voice changed a little. He didn't recognize her, and anyway. We don't expect rabbis to recognize women because rabbis aren't expected to be looking at women. That was where we ended. So along these lines, we're going to see a few other things, and one of them quite an odd one. But the first one is another shofar, Ha'u Tavra, with the top of our daf second line. Again, Rav Yomi bar Abba. Again, Rav Yomi bar Abba is signed on this shofar of a woman saying, I got my money for my k'tuba from this man. And the man pulls it out. She claims, I didn't get paid. He pulls out the shavar of Yirmiyah signed. Amrle lav ana havai. Sounds like the same kind of story. She says, that's not me. But instead of, in this case, where Rav Yirmiyah Rabbi said, I thought it wasn't you at first, and then I realized it was because I didn't really recognize you. This time, Amrala Ivra Antava. He says, I remember you. This is you. Now, didn't we just say that he's not supposed to be looking at women, so how can he recognize her? To which Abai explains, even though normally we don't have expectations that the Talmud Chacham is going to recognize the women because they didn't really look too hard at them. But Kevin did dak. But if he did recognize them, of course we accept it. We don't say, oh, you must be lying because there's no way you recognize her because you weren't supposed to be looking at her. No, because sometimes they do look, and therefore, if he does recognize her, he obviously recognizes her. Okay, now comes the strange one. Amar Abaye. Abaye says, and I say strange because with our modern eye, and the way we do things nowadays, it's very hard to understand this. Maybe in certain communities it is, I don't know. But Amar Abaye, it's strange from a bunch of perspectives, and without more warning, I will read. When a Talmid Chacham goes to betroth a woman, who presumably he's met before, but the idea is that since he doesn't really look at the woman, he may not recognize her very well. So when he goes to show up to his betrothal, okay, you ready for this? So first of all, it's already strange. We're worried that he might not recognize her, but even more so, Nidaber ama aretz behadeh. He should bring an ama aretz with him to make sure, right? Dilma mechalfu lamine, in case they swap her for somebody else. Apropos the parsha last week with Yaakov and Rachel and Leah. And maybe they'll swap her and this Ama Aretz. Now, what's funny about this is, generally the Talmud Chachamim try to keep their distance from the Ama Aretz. They institute all sorts of things, right? Where they do Meiser, and then you can't really eat with them. And it was all this distancing. All of a sudden, it's the day of your betrothal, big day in your life. Make sure to have an Ama Aretz with you so that they don't swap the women. The assumption is the Ama Aretz look at the women. So they'll recognize who the woman is, and they'll make sure that she doesn't get swapped. And you should make sure to do that on the day of your betrothal. Interesting. I'm not sure what to make of that, but definitely times were different than they are now. And again, both in terms of this concern that maybe they'll swap the bride, and in terms of, it's a little bit interesting that here the Gemara says, go find an Ama Aretz, it's a good example of sometimes what your weak point is could become your strong point, right? The rabbis clearly look at it as a weak point that the Ama Aretz look at women. On the other hand, there's a certain advantage because then they know who people are and we won't have to worry about this problem. Okay, moving on. Habal noten sachal. So now we get back to the Mishna. And I mentioned when we read it, it listed for every case that we need to know who's supposed to write the document, right? Number one, we dealt with who can write it in front of who needs the other person, which side of this partnership of these two people which side can write it without the other side, and which side needs to make sure the other side is there if they're going to write this kind of document, depending on who it benefits and who it doesn't benefit. Now, it's pretty clear in all the cases who benefits more from this contract. So the question is, if it's clear who benefits, then why does the Mishnah need to tell us who needs to pay for it? Obviously, the one benefiting is the one who needs to pay for the document to be written. So we're going to go through one by one and say, why did the Mishnah tell us this? Isn't it obvious? Habal noten sachar. So the husband, this one, maybe it's not as obvious, although it is pretty obvious. And they're not going to say it's obvious. They're just going to, in this case, say, what's the reason? My time. Why does the husband pay for the get? Well, that's pretty clear because the pasuk says you should write it and give it. And obviously the subject of that is the husband. He writes the get, he initiates, as we said before, even he can give it without against her will. So obviously he writes it and he pays. Well, you might think it's obvious, but the Gemara comes and points out something interesting. But nowadays, it's not nowadays, but it's back then at their time, already in the time of the Amoraim, even though the Mishnah said it's clear the husband pays for the document to be written, we don't do it that way. How do we explain that? Meaning the woman pays for her get, right? Which at first sounds preposterous, right? She doesn't even, we don't know. Maybe she does want to get divorced. Maybe she doesn't, but the husband initiates, the husband does it all. She has to pay for it. That sounds crazy. However, they're going to explain, and it's a really good reason why. We don't want to delay the giving of the get. And if we make the husband pay for the get, it's very likely the husband will say, I don't want to spend the money. And then the woman will be an aguna. And here you see, okay, we all know there's a lot of aguna issues in our world, and there have been for centuries. But despite the fact that there are aguna issues that are difficult to resolve, and God willing, we will come up with ways to resolve them. But you already see many times in the Gemara and in the Mishnah as well, there's a desire to try to minimize aguna issues as best as possible. So here's an easy one, even though it's a little unfair to the woman, but it's in the best interest of the woman. If she pays for it, that she can make sure it happens quickly and she doesn't end up sitting around waiting for her divorce and not being able to remarry. So because of that, it's very interesting, right? We see how halacha can change based on, even though theoretically the Mishnah is very clear, he's supposed to pay, but for a better reason, right? For a valid, trying to word it better, but when there's something really important, we can change those kind of issues, right? This is an easy one to change. Even though in the end, it's a little unfair. The woman has to pay for the get to be written. So now we get back to the lova and the malve. And what did we say? That we write it, right? And then we said the lokach noten sachar, the buyer pays for the document to be written. And then we said the buyer is the one who benefits, usually, right? Even though the seller also benefits, but the benefit's more for the buyer. So the Gemara says, pshita, obviously. So why are you telling us this? To which they, oh, sorry, I skipped the wrong one. Shtar lelove, alpha pishe malvemo. We're on the borrower first. The borrower obviously pays because why would the borrower not pay? The lender's doing the borrower a favor by lending money. They're not even getting interest or anything. So of course the borrower pays. So pshita, it's obvious. To which they answer, l'tzricha be'iska. Well, in an investment. What does that mean? Well, if I invest money with you, and you're the investor, you're going to take the money and you're going to invest it and make money off of it, and I'm going to get proceeds. Now, that's very different from a loan, because a loan, the creditor doesn't get anything. In this case, the person giving the money, who's like the lender, the creditor, actually benefits. So it's benefit to both sides. Now, if you ask who benefits more from the investment, the one who's investing the money or the one who gave the money to be invested? And what this is saying is, even in that case, the one who gets the money is like a borrower, and therefore that person has to pay for the document to be written. And if you think about it, right, you have a fund where, someone's raising money to be able to invest in companies. So they're the ones benefiting. I mean, of course, the investors are benefiting as well, but they're the ones motivated. They do all the work and they're trying to make money, right, with different people's money. So they're the ones benefiting more, and therefore they're the ones who have to pay the money for the contract to be written. So now we'll go back to the mocher and the lokach, which I accidentally jumped to before, which is, oh, and by the way, the Rimi Gash says it well also. He says, they're very much like a loved because the one who's investing the money doesn't have money to invest unless you give it to them. So they're benefiting because without that, they don't have money. Whereas you have money as the person investing, you have money anyway. So they can't invest without your money. So therefore, it's also benefiting them. Okay, the seller and the buyer. So we said it's obvious the buyer benefits, even though the seller also benefits, but the benefits more on the buyer. So again, they say pshita, it's obvious the buyer has to pay for the document to be written, to which they answer, lo tzricha b'mocher sadeu mipnei ra'ata. Saying, well, it's teaching you that even in a case where the seller is desperate to get rid of the land, and therefore perhaps you might think they're benefiting more than the buyer, no, we still put it on the buyer, and that could be for one of two reasons. Either because we still think the buyer is benefiting more, even if the seller is trying to get rid of their property. Also, it could be that we just say lo plug. We're just going to say it's the same rule all the time, even though there might be circumstances where it doesn't exactly fit. En kotvin shtare erusin. Okay, we're back to the erusin, right? We said with both of them, and then we said the chatan gives the money. And we said, right, because the chatan is the one who's really benefiting because the money is really going to them. They get control of the wife's money, and all the nedunya, all the gifts are really in the husband's control. So they say pshita, the husband needs to write it, even though, right, you might have said, well, the women always want to get married. It's in their best interest to get married. But no, they still say the benefit's more on the husband, right? If you don't remember all those sugyas, or if you haven't learned them yet, so, right, it's all about the fact that the women needed financial protection and financial stability, and the man provided that in their society. So therefore, there was always a desire on the part of the women to be getting married. So they answer, Lo tzricha filu tzorva merabanan denicha le'lechamua lekaruve. You might think that if she's marrying a Talmid Chacham, maybe the benefit is more on her family. Her family is so excited and so happy. They're benefiting from having a Talmid Chacham in the family. That's such a benefit that maybe you would switch it. And in that case, the bride's side would have to write the document. And the answer is no. Okay, either we still see it as a financial advantage for the husband, or again, we just don't distinguish. You see how important it was for them their daughters to marry Talmidei Chachamim. Okay, moving on to the next one. Ein kotvim shtar arisut v'kablanut. Again, pshita. Obviously, the kablan or the aris, the sharecropper, is the one who's benefiting because they've got a job now and they're going to make money, as opposed to the person who has a field, who anyway has things growing in the field, and obviously they need workers, but it's more of a desire on the part. Again, both, you see how it could go both ways, but more of the benefit is on the kablan or aris. So why are they telling us this? To which they answer, l'tzricha bivura. What if I decide to sharecrop a property, and it happened to be a year that the land was supposed to lie fallow, because they would do year on, year off in certain fields, sometimes year on, 2 years off. There were different arrangements with different fields and depending on the needs of the field. So if I take the job in a year when, I don't know why I would do this, but I guess for the long term, so you might say for the short term, it's not really a benefit for me because I'm not going to get anything. Still, we're going to view it as my responsibility to have the document written. Now we go back. Okay, so we're done with all of those. Now we want to explain what shtar berurin is, which we didn't explain yesterday. So there you need the agreement of both sides. My shtarei berurin, what is this? We're going to have two different interpretations, which some of the commentators say they don't really disagree. It's more that each one is bringing another example of what could be a shtar berurin. The first interpretation, here in Babylonia, they explain shtarei ta'anata. It's the claims or the rights of each side. There's different ways of explaining this, but perhaps it's like the affidavit of each side, what they each say. It could be what their rights are. Not exactly clear, but let's assume their claims. And Rav Yomi bar Abba Amal, Zeborer Loachav, Zeborer Loachav, which we're going to get to in the beginning of the third chapter of Sanhedrin, which is there's certain times, and we'll talk about this much more in detail when we get to the third chapter, what exactly a Beit Din of Borurim is. It's an arbitration court. And it's a case where instead of we come before three judges, we choose our judges. You choose one, I choose one, and then either the two of us together or the two judges together, there's different interpretations, choose the third. So the shtarei berurin would be this person chose this judge, that person chose that judge, and then the third judge, and it would all be written down and documented. And that would be both of them would write it, because again, because it's specifically right arbitration, it's equal. It's both sides are writing it. Now, if you remember, or if you might not remember, Rav Shimon Gamliel, the Mishna had a different opinion. Omer, instead of they both have to pay the price together, shneim kotvim shnayim, Lezeh ba'atzmo, lezeh ba'atzmo. They each write two, the two of them write two documents, right? Each one writes one for one person, one for the other person. Now, what's the purpose of these two documents? Why do you have to write it in two documents? So either it's the ta'anot, let's just go with it's the claims. I write mine and I pay for mine. You write yours and you pay for yours. Whereas Tanakama said you write it all together and you share the price. So at first they think that the machloket is this. Lema, why don't we suggest bekofina midat stone kamiflage? Their machloket is, can you force, once I remember kofina midat stone, it's come up a whole bunch of times in our Masechet. Can we force someone to do something that doesn't harm them at all, that's good for the other side? Meaning, if I, let's say, want to write my own shtar ta'anata, and you say, let's just write it together and save the money. I can't afford a full document. We'll just write one document. We'll each share it 50-50. So can we force me to, right? It's no skin off my back. It's even less money I have to pay, but I don't want to. Can we force me to have to share the document with you and write it all together? So is that the machloket? Demar savar kofin, the Tanakama says we can force me. And that's why it says we write one document and we share the cost. We could write two documents, but if you don't want to write two documents because you don't want to pay for a whole document, then you can force me to pay, to share the price with you and not write two documents. And Mar Saval ain't kofin. And Rashbag says, no, I can do whatever I want. We're not kofin, we got stone. Even if it's no skin off my back, we don't force me to do what's in your best interest. To which the Gemara answers, lo, that's not the machloket between them. Dekule alma kofin. Everyone agrees that you can force al midat stone. Of course, we're going to force me to share the cost with you if that's the case. But this case is not that kind of a case. The reason why Rav Shimon ben Gamliel says we write two separate documents is something totally different. Theoretically, you could force me to share the document, but you can't for a different reason. To Amrle, lo nichale, what did we say? If it's no skin off my back, then you could force me. But it is skin off my back. And here, it's a little bit complicated to understand what this is about. But to Amrle, lo nichale de tehave schutech lekabe schuti. I don't want to have your claims next to my claims in the same document. Why not? Didamit alai ki arya arva. Because it feels to me like there's a lion about to attack me, about to ambush me. I don't want your claims in front of me all the time. Again, it's hard to understand the reality. It sounds like the document would stay in your property, or you would, at least whenever I would pull out the document to see what my rights are, or my claims are. Okay, it's either rights or claims. Every time I see mine, I'm going to see yours, especially if we talk about rights. Like, I don't want to see what your rights are. I want to know what my rights are. I don't want to see your rights. And it's, thanks for the translation, Ruth. It's like a lurking lion. It's like you're always over me. But the Rashbam, if you read the Rashbam, he says, it's toward the bottom of the daf. Every time I see it written, everything you claim against me, right? It's like going to annoy me every time I see your claims. And then, and then it's going to cause us, right, to fight more. You're like every time I read it, I just think about that fight we're having with each other. And I don't want it in my face all the time. So like I said, it's a good question why the document is there, why you have the document. But I think it just means kind of every time you pull it out to look at, go to look at something, you'll see the other person's claims, and better to keep that separate according to Rashbam. Tanakam obviously doesn't see an issue with this. Okay, we finished to the next Mishnah. Let's start the new Mishnah. Totally different issue. Somebody pays back part of the loan. So I lent you $100, you paid me back $50. Now, normally what will we do? We write a shoval that says you paid me $50, and you would keep the shovar as your receipt so that if I go and claim, I still have the document that says you owe me $100. If I try to pull that out, you'll say, oh, I paid $50 already. But in this case, instead of doing that, we decided we were going to give it to a third party. And it was really your decision. You said, listen, I'm going to give it to a third party. They're going to watch the shtar. They're going to remember that I paid half already. So now this third person, instead of me keeping the shtar, which is usually what happens, so I agree to your demand. Why do I agree? Because listen to the condition you made. You say to me the following: we're going to give this person the shtar to write, to watch. The shtar says I owe you 100, but we know that you don't owe me 100. And so does this third party. So whenever it comes time to pay, right, they'll pull out the shtar. They'll say, it's someone we both rely on. They'll say that you only owe me 50 and you'll pay me 50. But you also say, Amar lo, im lo natati lecha mikav ad yom ploni, tein lo shtaro. But you say that in the event, you basically commit. We're going to give this shtar to a third party, but you're going to commit to pay me by January 1. And if you don't pay by January 1, what will happen? The person who's holding the document will return the document to me, and I will now be able to collect the entire amount. And it's your way of basically saying, I promise I'm going to give this to you by January. And if I don't give it to you by January, I'm willing to pay double. Okay? I'm willing to have this person give you back the shtar. I have no shavar to prove that I paid anything, and it would be as if I didn't pay you anything. You might remember this because we've learned it before, and in a minute you'll see why. So higiaz ma velo natan. So let's say January 1 comes and you don't return it. So what happens? Well, Rabbi Yosi omeo yitain. Rabbi Yosi says you have to pay up. In other words, I'm going to get the shtar back and I'm going to demand the $100. Rabbi Yehuda omer lo yitain. Rabbi Yehuda says no way. That's not valid. Now, why is it not valid? Well, the Gemara is going to answer. But my kamif again, it's a very famous machloket. Rabbi Yosi savar asmachta kanya. Do you remember asmachta? What is asmachta? We've seen it already a number of times. Asmachta, and it's a good question. What is asmachta? Because it's a big unclear term, and there's a lot of different cases to talk about asmachta, and people try to define it, but it's very hard to define exactly. You can see footnotes on, that can describe to you a little bit about the different interpretations, but it's really a very small bit of the huge sugya that it is, and we'll get to it also in Sanhedrin. But asmachta is when you don't really commit to doing something. You commit to it, but it's such either an exaggerated claim or so unlikely it'll ever happen. And you're just trying to, right? All you were trying to say is, I promise I'll give it to you by January 1st. But you didn't really mean to really pay me back double. Why would anyone pay double what they paid, right? Even it doesn't necessarily mean double, but why would they ever, if they already paid back part of the loan, commit to paying the rest of it? And that's why we call it asmachta, because it's so unlikely that you really meant it. However, Rabbi Yosi holds no matter what, that asmachta is kanya. You committed to it. It might be absurd, but you committed to it. So what's the difference if it's absurd? You committed to this absurd claim and you have to pay. And Rabbi Yehuda savar asmachta lo kanya. Rabbi Yehuda says, no, you didn't really mean it. You were just trying to bolster your claim and make me confident that I was going to get my money back in time. And you had all intents to actually pay it on time. So you never, when you promised to pay back double, you didn't really mean it because you didn't ever think that you would get to that point. If you did, well, you didn't mean to get there. So you never really meant what you said. So now there's something interesting in this sugya because Amar Rav Nachman, Amar Rav Ravua, Amar Rav. So now we're going to quote Rav Nachman, who quotes Rav Ravua, quotes Rav, who says, Halacha ki Rabbi Yosi. We hold like Rabbi Yosi that asmachta is kanya. It works. It's an effective commitment. You have to keep to it. And ki atzal kamei Rabbi Ami, a case came before Rabbi Ami, va'amar lehu, and he said to them, B'chi me'achar Rabbi Yochanan malamdenu pam rishona u'shniya halacha ki Rabbi Yosi ani ma'aseh. Sounds like Rabbi Ami doesn't want to hold asmachta kanya, but he says, look, what can I do? Rabbi Yochanan told me once, he told me twice. The asmachta is konan. We hold like Rabbi Yosi. So what do you want me to do? And in general, we hold like Rabbi Yosi when he disagrees with other people. Okay, like Rabbi Yosi mechavero, we always hold like Rabbi Yosi. So this would be a perfect place to end the sugya, and it would be so confusing. We'd say, okay, even though it seems a little unreasonable, asmachta is konan. But the Gemara ends with this line said by we don't know who. We don't know when this was added to the Gemara, and says, despite the fact that Rav and Rabbi Yochanan, who are they're early Amoraim, and we always hold like later Amoraim. Okay, we heard like Batra, but still, Rav and Rabbi Yochanan were of the top, most prominent rabbis of the first and second generation of Amoraim. The Gemara says, "Ein halacha ke Rabbi Yosi." Despite the fact they both held like Rabbi Yosi, the Gemara says we do not hold like Rabbi Yosi, and in fact, la halacha we don't hold like Rabbi Yosi, and we don't hold the asmachtas konet, and basically we say, okay, you obviously didn't mean what you say, and therefore your words are meaningless because you never meant to really give over the rights of that shtar to that third party to be able to return the entire shtar to me, and therefore I can't demand the whole document. Okay, that was our little sugya of asmachta, and now we're moving on to a new sugya, new Mishna. Misha nimchak shtar chovo. We have a shtar that's erased. It's a bit of a deliberation among the commentaries. How much is it erased? Which case is Mishnah talking about? Is it erased completely? Is rishumoni kar, which we're going to see that comes up in the Gemara, where you could still see the letters underneath. There's no ink. Okay, this happened to me. I just the other day when I pulled out my ketubah to read part of my ketubah, we were talking about the kanina mina and the last line repeating. So I noticed that the word kanina was ranina, and you couldn't see it was a kuf. So I go to my husband and I said, "What's going on with our ketubah? I already like the signatures of the edim are fading." And he said, you could see, if you look really carefully, which then I did, you could see the line of the kuf. It was like an indentation in the page. So you could see that, and that's what we call rishumoni kar. So we're not sure if the Mishnah is talking about rishumoni kar or not rishumoni kar, completely erased, part of it erased, the whole thing erased. It's very unclear. But some sort of case, and I'm leaving it open because the commentaries all have different opinions about this, so there's no clear answer. But nimchak shtar chovo, I have a shtar that you owe me money, and it gets erased. Ma'amid alavidim, I go find witnesses that saw the shtar and saw that we had a loan and saw that it was signed by witnesses. They come to court and testify, balifnei beitin, vosim lo kiyum, and they establish the document. They say, we saw the shtar, right? They say, ish ploni ben ploni nimchak shtaro b'yom ploni. They say, Michelle had a document that was erased and turning out to amabet, uploni edav. And the witnesses, right? These were the witnesses of the previous shtar and so on. Now, the Mishnah is leaving out some important details, which the Tosefta, that Gemara is going to quote right now, is going to include. Tanu Rabbanan, or perhaps the Tosefta is talking about a different case, and maybe this isn't so erased, and maybe that's sufficient. But we're going to talk about now what the problem is. Because it's very nice that these witnesses saw the document, but if you remember, if I bring a document to the court and say, you owe me money, and here's the document, what do we have to do? We have to do kiyum shtar. First, we have to validate the signatures. Now, if these two witnesses are testifying, we saw the document, we saw it was signed, it doesn't mean we saw that the signatures were valid and we didn't check them out. So the Tosefta adds another level. Tanu Rabbanan. So we quote now starting from the Tosefta, Ezehu kiyumo. How do we do the kiyum? Like, what do we write in this new document? So we write b'motav tlata havina, anu ploni uploni ploni. We were three of us sitting there. That's generally when you have a court, say the three of us sat together. Hotzi ploni ben ploni shtar machuk lefanenu b'yom ploni. So that was me, Michelle ben bat so-and-so, brought a shtar machuk, brought an erased document in front of us on the following day. Uploni edav. Now the edim, according to the Rashbam here, is referring to the original edim. And these were the original edim on the document. And some people say, and you also add, who are the edim who testified about the document as well. V'im katuvbo. Now, there's two options of what could be written now in the continuation of the shtar. Im katuvbo huskachnu le'edutan shel edim v'nimtzeit edutan mechuvenet, goveh ve'eno tzarich lavi raya. If it says in the document, and we quizzed those original witnesses, and we questioned them, right? We can't establish their signatures, so the only thing we could do to establish that it was really valid is find those witnesses and quiz them and find out, was it really valid? And if they say, yes, that person really did, Michelle really lent money to so-and-so, yes, we know that, then we're good, okay? Then I can collect my money, and I don't need to bring any further proof. But in law, we can't find those witnesses, or those witnesses won't verify the facts of the document. Sarich lavi raya. You need some other sort of proof. You have to find proof that this loan actually happened, and without that, you can't collect anything. Even though someone established that this was erased, and we saw the witnesses sign, maybe it was a forged document. And what if we do find proof? Okay, now it's really important, because if we find proof, right, it almost seems useless. Like, obviously, if you find proof, so then you have proof that there was a loan. But think about it. We want to reinstate this shtar. We have two things. We want to reinstate the shtar, which then means I could collect my loan. Well, if we can't reinstate the shtar because the witnesses won't verify the facts of the shtar, but we do find other proof that I actually loaned you money, then it's a loan. I could collect the money from you, but it's a milva al peh. We can't rely on the shtar. We can't say, oh, that must be what it said in the erased shtar. because we have no proof of it, and the witnesses won't verify anything. So we end up with what we call a milva al peh. We can prove that you owe me money, but it's only an oral loan. What's the big difference? Remember, if it's written, you can collect from lien property. If it's not written, you can't collect from lien property. So I can now collect this money, but not from lien property. So there's two tracks. Either we establish and we speak to the witnesses, and that's after witnesses come and said, we saw the document, we find the witnesses, and then we go question them. If they verify the facts, we're good. If not, not. Okay. Now the Tosefta continues. Nikra, pasul, nitkarea kasher. It's hard to translate these words into English, but nikra is it was torn, it's disqualified. Nitkarea, which is also it was torn, kasher, it's good. So these are two different types of tears. One is it happened to it, and one is it was intentional. Okay, if it was intentionally ripped, then it's pasul. If it happened to it, okay, it just got ripped somehow, then it's kasher. How we're going to figure this out, we're going to have to get to that soon. Nimchak o nitashtesh, if it was erased or smudged, right, like someone took the ink and just smudged the whole thing and you can't read it anymore, or erased, like we said before, here we get to the rishumoni kar, as I mentioned with my ketuba, im rishumoni kar kasher. If you can see the indentations and you can read it even without the ink, it's good. So now the Gemara wants to know, okay, we had this Tosefta, it said nikra, nitkarea, what's the difference? How do we know? So we're going to have two answers. We're going to have one answer. Soon we're going to have two answers, but the first answer is going to be one answer, and then we're going to have something that's split into two. Amar Rav Yehuda, nikra kera shel beitin, nitkarea kera she'eno shel beitin. If the court tore it up, then it's considered nikra, and that's no good. You can't use this anymore. Nitkarea is a kera that's not from beitin. It's torn not by the court. I was thinking in the old days when you didn't have electronic tickets to things, right? You used to walk into a show or a movie theater with a ticket and they would rip it, right? And that would be the sign, right? They always ripped it the same way. And then everyone would know this is ripped. You can't use it again. As opposed to, it tore in your pocket. That's a different thing. So that would be the distinction. So now they want to know, how do you identify which one it is? So I'm a Rav Yehuda. Okay, we're going to have two answers which don't necessarily contradict each other. These could be two different ways of discerning. Makom edim or makom azman or makom hatoreh. So Rav Yehuda says if it's torn in the important places of the document, where the edim are signed, where the zman is signed, the time, where the toref, which is the name of the people, the details, the important details, right? The court is going to rip it by the important thing about when you tear a check, right? You make sure to tear the important part so that nobody reuses your check. Same thing with the court. The part that's not so important, they don't need to bother tearing up. Abaye amar shtiva erev. Okay, different from what they usually do in the theater. They just rip it one way. In the court, they would rip it one direction and then in the opposite direction. Make two perpendicular tears, and that would be a sign that it was the court. And that's just more obvious that nobody doesn't usually tear by accident in two different directions. Okay, now we're going to have a story. Hanu arvaida atulupabedita davu anse arata di inashe. There were these Arabs that came to the town of Pobedita, and they would basically seize people's property. And they would not only seize their property, they would also take their documents, their shtar mecher, their documents that prove that they had bought the land. So these people were left with nothing, no document that they own the land, and no land. So before they actually they must have started seizing property, and some people came to Abaye and said, we want to protect ourselves. Atum Ravatayu, these landowners, came l'kamei de Abaye, before Abaye. Amrule, lichse mar shtarin, v'lichtov la mar shtara achrina ale. Just like we had the erased document that we could rewrite it kind of thing. They say, look, here's our document. Can you make us a copy? Write us, you see that we own the land. Write us another one, and that way, De'i mitnas, if we're in nasim, right? They take our stuff, chad, and they take one away, naktin and chabiyadam. We'll still be left with one. They won't know we have another spare copy. So then that will protect us, which sounds like a reasonable suggestion. Amar lehu, he says to them, what are you talking about? In other words, I'd like to help you, but my avid lehu, what can I do? I can't help you with this. Da amar Rav Safra, ein kotvim shnei shtarot al sadeh echad. We can't write two documents for one piece of land. Why not? Okay, theoretically, it sounds like it's okay. I can't own this land twice. Like I'm not going to be able to claim the land 2 times. So what's the problem? If it was a loan, we obviously wouldn't make a copy because then I could collect the loan twice. I could collect the money, but I can't collect the land twice. Well, you can. Dilma tarif v'hadar tarif. Okay, but the Rashbam explains what this means. Okay, Dilma tarif v'hadar tarif. Ze halokech shekanas sadeh ba'achrayut. If I bought the land with achrayut, which usually I do, which means if someone seizes it, I can go take it from the seller. I can go demand the money from the seller. Not only can I demand it from the seller, I can demand it from the seller from land the seller sold to somebody else. So if I have 2 documents, let's say I bought this land, I can take one. Let's say they seize my property. I can go to the seller and say, hey, you sold to me b'achrayut. The seller has no money. I'll go to someone who he sold land to and I'll demand the money from them. So I could go to Ruvain over there and demand land, and I could go to Shimon over there and demand land from Shimon. So I can get, because I can use one star, and I'll get from that one, they'll rip up the star, but then I still have another one, and I can basically end up collecting twice. So even though theoretically I can't demand land twice, the land itself that I bought, but I can use it to get land, to get money out of somebody else. And I could do it from 2 different people, and therefore we don't allow this. So Abaye said, I'd like to help you, but can't help you. My hands are tied because Rav Safra said you can't do this. They didn't like this, and they kept bugging him. Remember that we had a case where the woman kept bugging, and then he said, let's make a forged document, like let's just trick her so she stops bothering us. So Abaye does the same thing. These people kept bugging him. We need a star now. Give us a star. So what did Abaye say? Amalei l'safra. He said to his sofer. By the way, it's funny that before it was Rav Safra, like sofer. There's a lot of always these literary things going on. He says to the sofer, Zil ktov lehu, hu ala machak, ve'edav al aniyal, de pasul. Go write them a disqualified document. Write them a document that, and we learned about this already, remember, that the text is on erased, right? The top was erased already. In other words, basically saying, write up a text, erase it, write on top of it a new star, and have the Adim sign on a part that wasn't erased. We already learned that there's a problem because we're going to be concerned. Someone forged this document because they erased the top part where the witnesses had signed and they wrote in something else. Okay, so that's a good solution. It's not really a good solution because it's invalid, but at least it'll make them feel better and they'll leave Abaye alone, even though in the end it won't really hold up anyway. And that's why Abaye is not worried about writing them a second star because it's not going to hold up in court if they try to demand the money from other people. But Amarle Ravacha Bar Menyume La Abaye says, how can that work? Dilma Rishumoni Kal. If they're going to write a document at the top, erase it and write a new document, when you erase, sometimes you could see the parts underneath. So if they wrote a document, presumably, he assumed what he was saying is write a document like someone owes someone money, or I don't know, someone sold land to someone, erase it, write something above. But then once they say, okay, well, the top part's no good, and let's say they erase that, they'll be able to see the wording underneath on the first version. And based on what we just said, if Rishumoni Kar, you can use it. And therefore, they might actually go by whatever you have these people write at the top. And then it's going to be a problem because you just made that up. Whatever they're going to put in the top, the sofer's going to write at the top is just totally made up. And then we have a problem because they might rely on that. So Abaye answers, I didn't continue what Rav Bacha said. Vitanya, and the Breita said, as we saw before, to which, right, so if you do that and it's erased, but you can still see the words underneath, it'll be a problem. And usually when you write, you can see things underneath. And therefore, how can you possibly even suggest this? To which Abaye says, you obviously didn't get what I meant. Amar lei, mi shtar ma'alya. I didn't mean write a star, so-and-so bought land from so-and-so, erase it, and then write above that these people bought their land. What I meant is, aleph bet ba'alma kamina. I just write gibberish at the top, right? Just aleph bet, whatever. I didn't mean write an actual document, erase it, and then write something. Just show that there were some letters underneath, gibberish letters. No one's going to rely on that because it doesn't say anything. And then erase it and then put this on top. And that's what I meant. And therefore, it's not a question at all. Tanu Rabbanan, last case for today. Hare Shabava Amal Avad Shtar Chovi. I go to court and I said, listen, I had an IOU. Someone owed me money. I gave someone a loan and I lost my document. Now, even if I bring to court witnesses that testify that there was a loan, Katavnu, v'chatamnu, v'natanu lo. Not only there was a loan, we wrote the document, we gave it to Michelle. She had, this was a real legit document. Ein kotvin lo et shtar. We still can't write me a shtar. Why? Because I claimed it was lost, but we've seen this already a lot of times that somebody says, oh, I lost the document, which there's no way to prove whether you lost it or not. And maybe you really have it and you're just lying and you're going to pull out the document. Or maybe you did lose it, but maybe you'll find it. So how many times are we convinced that we've lost something and then we actually end up finding it? So we never write a second document because, again, you could then claim twice that the person owes you money. But comes the Gemara or the Brighton and says, but b'mid dvarim amurim, which case are we talking about? Shtarei halva'ah. These are loan documents. You can't write a loan document twice. Aval shtarei mekach umem kar kotvin. But you can write a second. If I say I lost my document of sale, they will write me a new document that I bought my house. Okay, this seems to go against what we just said because I could claim money. Well, the Gemara, the Brighton resolves that by saying, chutz min ha'achrayut shebo. We just don't write that there's any achrayut on it. We just write that I bought this land is mine, but we don't say that I have any sort of guarantee on the land. Because if I had a guarantee on the land, then it could be I'll have two documents and then I'll be able to collect twice. So I get a document proving I own the land, which sort of resolves the previous, right? There's a certain, I have that I own the land, but not that I have any sort of guarantee on it. And therefore, there's no concern that I'll use this twice, because again, I can't have two houses that are one house. It's one house. I'm not going to claim I have more than what I have by having a copy of the same document. And if there's no guarantee, then I won't be able to try to demand it from somebody else. And therefore, there's not the problem that Abai was stating earlier. And that's the end of today's daf. So we'll continue more on that topic tomorrow. I was thinking, Becky, I think it's a really good question. Why didn't Abaye do this? I didn't look that up. It actually just came into my mind right now. Why didn't Abaye suggest doing that? And then they'd at least have a copy. But I assume it's because a copy wouldn't have helped them, because if they wanted, they would need the guarantee to be able to seize the property back. I think that was maybe the idea. I think because they were worried that these people were going to take it and take everything. And then, I don't know, I'm not sure. I have to think about it more. Okay, so going back, what did we have? We started with that whole issue of the rabbis not looking at women, or what if they do look at women, and have they betrothed women to make sure no one gets swapped. And then we had why we went through all the cases in the Mishnah, why specifically somebody would, why the Mishnah has to tell you that that's the person who pays when it's quite obvious. And we found cases where it's less obvious. We tried to prove why it is they have to pay. We tried to explain what a shtar berurin is. We had two different explanations. And then we wanted to understand the machloket about the shtarei berurin between Tanakama and Rashbag about, do they share it, or can they write separate documents? Then we went to the case of asmachta, of the shtar, that if I don't pay, then you can give back the shtar completely. And we saw the machloket in asmachta. We saw the rabbis paskin like Rabbi Yosi, but then the Gemara says, no, we don't hold like Rabbi Yosi at all on this issue. And from there, we got to the erasure, the erased shtar, how we reinstate it. What about ripped shtar? What's the difference between the tears? We talked about if it's rishumoni kar, if you can still see underneath, then you can use it. And then we had that case with the people seizing the land with Abaye. And then we finished with the other case of someone trying to rewrite a shtar, claiming it was lost, where we don't allow that, certainly not in a loan. We could allow it in land as long as there's no guarantee. With that, we'll finish for today. Wishing everyone a good day.